This is the Mooks and the Gripes podcast. Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful September. This is Trevor. Hastily, Paul, let's hear from you really quick, please.
Yeah, now I'm feeling a little flustered. Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm ready to go. How about
Okay, that was great. And I wanted to just get you out of the way because we have a special guest today, and we want to slow down now.
Yeah.
Nora, we are so excited to have you on our episode today to discuss a topic that we brainstormed together, but it was one that you presented and came up with, and we've been polishing it up and excited to get forward on it. We'll get to that in a minute, but welcome to the show, Nora.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. This is so lovely. It's nice to talk to you now.
Well, Nora, we have been excited to talk with you for a long time. I think you're one of the early people that we kind of put on a list of, we want to ask Nora someday to jump on with us, because we're friends on Twitter and on Instagram, where you post not only lovely photos and reels, they're always so nice, and then on Sundays you do your weekly book chat. And so I feel very fortunate to have you with us today. Is there anything that you, and I better say, if you're okay with it, we will put in the show notes where to find you on Instagram and on Twitter and anywhere else that you would like people to find you, But is there anything else you'd like to say to help our listeners get to know you just a little bit?
First, thank you so much for your kind words. And I have this Instagram, or Bookstagram, I guess you would call it, that I started this year. During the pandemic, I started thinking that I wanted to do something with books, because books and also book content, your podcast and BookTube, have been such a comfort during those weird times. And I've always been like a bookworm, but there was like a dip in my reading just before the pandemic, and the pandemic sort of rekindled that. And I just felt like I wanted to do something a bit proactive, like an Instagram on books. And so this year in March, I opened this account, and it's mainly focused on women writers and seasonal reading. I like to do those monthly recommendations of book sets in each month or each season. And then, as you said, on Sundays, I generally talk about the books I've read during the week.
And one of your recent discussions, one of the books you recently read was South Riding.
We could talk about it today, actually.
I won't spoil the episode. That's one that I think I mentioned to you in a comment. I told Nancy Pearl last year, I'm going to read that one in the spring. And then the spring came along. I still haven't done it yet. I've been saying that for years now, that I want to read that one soon. And so
how close are you?
I could start it today, but I probably won't. It'll probably be sometime down the tube still. When we get to what have you been reading, I put some things in front of it that it might be a while still. But
I saw that stack you posted on Instagram of what you're reading right now. It seems like it might be a while.
That was just for fun. I tried to pick some of the biggest books that were just sitting out and throw them together.
I was going to say, man, Trevor got really ambitious.
Yeah, that's not my current reading. Some of it is, but some of it is not. So, but anyway, thanks so much for joining us, Nora. We're looking forward to talking with you about Spinster Lit. Before we get there, I do have just a few things of business to cover. It's been a while since I have thanked people who have joined us on Patreon. Paul, you and I have had a busy last several months, so we actually haven't even published a bonus episode there. We're very sorry, but there are still people who have signed up that we need to thank. Patrick Preciosi. Patrick is a good friend as well. A connection with McNally Editions. Thanks so much for all that you do there. That's just one of our favorite presses that we brought up. Do you remember, Paul, as one of the things we were looking forward to in 2022 was their initial run of titles, and it's just the promise has been fulfilled and exceeded. Of what I was
going to say, it's been everything we've wanted and more, for sure.
Nafisa, I don't have a last name, but Nafisa, thank you so much for your support. Cindy Evans, Kevin Adams, and most recently Barbara Vandersvog. I apologize if I'm saying any of those names wrong. If it's not Kevin, but it's Kevin or Kevin. Now that one I think was an easy one. But Barbara, your last name I probably said it wrong, and Patrick, I may have even said your last name incorrectly as well. But we very much appreciate the support, and we are getting in the works of putting together some more bonus content. That may be something that we mostly do during the quote unquote school year.
Mm,
It's
right.
harder during the summer to do those, but maybe we need to figure that out as well. But thanks so much for your support. And why don't we get on to what have you been reading? Paul, if you don't mind, do you mind if we start with Nora to hear what she's been reading, or
No,
would
I
you
think
like
we
to jump
should.
in? Okay, good.
Yeah, this time I'll let Nora go first, I guess.
Oh, thanks
All
so much,
right.
Paul. So what have I been reading? So with my Instagram at the minute, we have like a little event to do with Spinster Lit called Spinster September. So I've been deep in Spinster Lit this week to sort of get prepared. So I finished this week The Rector's Daughter by F.M. Mayer. I don't know if any of you have read it.
Not read it.
No.
But yeah, it's about a spinster, a 35-year-old woman. She's a vicar's daughter. Her name is Mary Jocelyn, and she lives in the countryside, and she has this very quiet life. And she's kind of bullied by her father. He's like an old man in his 80s, and he has his ways, and there's no other way. So she's sort of meekly following him and doing his bids. And she's also giving Bible class and women meetings in the village. So she's quite active in the village. And yeah, it's a look into that kind of life, spinsters, and it's set in the 20s. Clergyman's daughters. It's a big subject in Spinster Lit, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And yeah, it was.
How did you? Oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to say it kind of broke me. It was a really sad book, but very, very beautiful nature writing, very evocative as well.
Ooh,
Sounds
that
good.
sounds really good.
How do you track down books like those that are maybe not as well known? Is it mostly just through online connections and things like that, or do you have a source that you go to for these types of books?
Well, specifically for Spinster Lit, I think Virago, the modern classics, have been a great source. But blogs as well, such as the one from Simon Thomas and Jackie Ryan, also are a great source. And Persephone, like those kind of specialized presses.
Yeah.
And I'll try to track each of these down. Like you mentioned, Simon and Jackie, they've both been guests on our show, but their blogs are wonderful resources. So I'll put those in the show notes as well, just so our listeners know they can go there to find them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, that I've finished that one, and I just started actually. Let me think. Excellent Women by Barbara Pym. Which is also about a clergyman's daughter, but much more lighter and humorous in tone. Thank God.
I read that one a couple of years ago and just loved it. So
yeah, me
exciting.
Too. Yeah, you're in for a treat with that one for sure.
We probably could. I don't think any of us chose a Barbara Pym novel, at least as our initials and such that we'll bring up later on. But maybe we could call this like the Barbara Pym or Anita Bruckner memorial list.
Exactly.
They sit on all of our thoughts as we discuss Spinster Lit.
We mentioned both of them pretty much every episode, anyways. So
Right.
I think that's just a given.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, for an episode about Spinster Lit, it's a bit insane that none of us have picked her. Yeah. But I'm new to her. It's my first one.
It's probably because, like, I probably would have, but we did just do our episode on Barbara Pym, and yeah, she does come up quite often. So I was like, well, maybe I should force myself to not just pick the first one that comes to mind and see what else shows up. But But that's
Exactly.
exciting. I look forward to hearing. I assume you'll talk about that over the coming month, is on your book chats on Instagram and such. So I'm
Yeah,
excited to hear about it.
him
Yeah,
too.
for sure.
Paul, how about you?
Ready for me? Yeah. So, I enjoyed getting back to the American West, reading about that so much when I was reading Centennial, which I talked about a little bit in our last episode over the past few weeks. So I was inspired to reread a book, The Sun by Philip Meyer. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
either one of you have read that one. It was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize back in 2014. And it's been probably about since that time that I read it. And, I think about it every once in a while. And I thought, I wouldn't mind reading a little bit more about, that whole time period. So the book kind of alternates between three different characters, each one from a different generation of the McCullough family. So Eli McCullough is kind of the patriarch of the family. He's a really tough and brutal man. And his story starts back in 1849 when he is kidnapped by some Native Americans who kind of raid his area and kill his family. And so he's taken prisoner along with his brother and ends up becoming a slave and living with that community. And then it goes on from there in his storyline. And then the next narrator is his son, Peter McCullough. And his section is set a little bit later in the early 1900s. And he is very, very different from his father. He has gone a very different path. And it kind of follows him as he's trying to deal with really brutal treatment of the Mexican families that are living in the area at that time. So that has some echoes of Cormac McCarthy. And then we skip ahead to 2012, where Eli's great granddaughter and then Peter's granddaughter, Jean Ann McCullough, the section focuses on her, and she's an aging, wealthy oil baroness. So it kind of rotates through these three every chapter, and it gives a really interesting perspective of the West, because you'll jump ahead, by 30 or 50 years at different times and kind of see how the tone has changed and how, interactions between the different people who live in that area have changed. But I mentioned Cormac McCarthy. It definitely has some of those vibes with kind of the unflinching looks at the violence and brutality that took place during that time. And it, so often the American West is romanticized, but I think there's been this movement back towards showing some of the harsh realities of what actually happened. So it's not always easy reading, but it's really well done. I just thought I'd read a really quick section. It's between Peter, who I mentioned is the son, who's a little bit more, I don't know, progressive, I guess, for the time than his dad. And it's the two of them, and they're out. And the dad says, "I remember when a 5-shot Colt was a weapon of mass destruction. Then you had maybe 20 years and there was a Henry rifle. Load it on Sunday and shoot it all week. 18 shots, I think." "Life gets better and better," I said. "I always thought those books would take you somewhere. I was sad when they didn't." "They have," I said. "I mean away from here. You think I don't sabe, but I do. My brother was exactly like you. It runs in the family." I shrugged. "Wrong place, wrong time, wrong something." "I like this family and I like this place," I told him, because for some reason at that moment it seemed true. He started to say something, then didn't. As we rode back through the sun and the dust toward our great white house on its hill, he seemed to relax, to settle into his saddle. I could tell his mind was wandering, doubtless over many things he had done for which the entire world admires him. I began to think of how often he was home during my childhood. Never. My mother making excuses for him. So maybe that'll give you just a little bit of a glimpse into the dialogue and these complicated relationships. That was just a short excerpt, but later on in that chapter, it goes on to talk about, how the dad thought that his books would take him away from all this, but he says, basically, he still finds a place there, but he also feels this conflict about, he is reading all these classics and different things and seeing that there's more to life. And I think that kind of helps him see some of the brutality and different things that are going on. So, it's a really interesting perspective when you get on to the granddaughter. She is like I said, a wealthy oil baroness, and she has some very conservative views that are like reflected in the modern times that maybe are going back to more, the grandfather's point of view. So it just shows all the different ways that time and circumstances can shape people in a family, and how complicated life can be. So yeah, it's been nice to revisit that one, and I'm looking forward to wrapping it up maybe in the next couple of days.
Nice. I did read that one when it came out, and I thought it was an excellent
Mm-hmm.
book.
Yeah, apparently it's part of a trilogy, which I've never tracked down. I think it's the middle one of a trilogy. So I don't know. Maybe I'll be inspired one of these days and check out the other two.
Well, So I did let Paul know already, everybody, but I finished Lonesome Dove and
Yes.
thought it was fantastic. And I told Paul I really don't think he'll be disappointed if he does watch the television miniseries with Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Duvall and Diane Lane. Just playing these great roles. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see. We'll see, Paul.
We'll
I'm okay
see.
if you don't do it. I
Yeah.
understand, but I think you'd be like, this is a nice way to remember and refresh my recollection of these books and such. But anyway, so I did finish that, and I've done something very foolish. Maybe it could end up being brilliant, but um, I told uh, my wife that I'm going to do War and Peace finally, and that I need to do it in Anthony Briggs translation after Chris Via's Leaf by Leaf video inspired that, and so she got it for me in that nice penguin cloth bound hardback
Mm, yeah.
edition. And I realized if I don't just start it, it'll always sit there as something I'm going to start soon. Speaking of South Riding. um, so I finally did sit down and start it. But I also got from Live Right, the publisher with kind of subsidiary of Norton,
Mm,
their new translation by Michael R. Cates of the Brothers Karamazov. And so I did start both of these. It's kind of stupid to do that, but I thought if I don't do it again, they're both going to sit there looking at. They're the ones I want to read right now of these big ones. So, but I am
hmm
regimenting myself. Um, I'm not wanting them to be the only things I read for the next 8-9 months. um,
Glad you didn't say years. I thought you were going to say years.
no, I've only done that with one book. The rest of them I tend to finish sooner. But I am very excited, and both of them have been going down really well. It's so cool to get back to the Brothers Karamazov after over 20 years and realize how much I'm enjoying it,
Mm,
and how much I remember of that first read through in terms of just, oh, I remember that feeling. I remember how awful the dad is, and how the
hmm
descriptions of him are. But the one that I started yesterday in order to follow along with the read along, and because it's the first Virginia Woolf novel published, but also that I need to read for my kind of reread through her work, is one I've never read. It's The Voyage Out. I've always been a little bit wary of it, thinking, oh, this is her first novel. She only, hits her stride a little bit with Jacob's Room. She's still experimenting with that. And while I like Jacob's Room, it's, Mrs. Dalloway, To the
mm,
Lighthouse, The Waves that really gets me going. So I've always kind of thought maybe I'll never read this one. It's really good. It's a
nice.
lot more straightforward and clear than I thought it might be. But it's really good. I don't even think I really know anything about the book itself. I just started it to keep on schedule. Dorian alerted me to it on August 31st, and today's September 2nd. So I started it yesterday because they started it yesterday, and so I just grabbed it and started. But I've been really delighted. The start is just some people coming together and getting onto a boat, leaving London behind. A little bit trepidatious, the woman thinking about her kids that she's leaving behind. Her husband's clearly a little snobby, and I think they're going to South America. But I really liked this quote from the first little bit when they're on the boat leaving, the floating down the Thames. It says, "Winding veils round their heads, the women walked on deck. They were now moving steadily down the river, passing the dark shapes of ships at anchor, and London was a swarm of lights with a pale yellow canopy drooping above it. There were the lights of the great theatres, the lights of the long streets, lights that indicated huge squares of domestic comfort, lights that hung high in air. No darkness would ever settle upon those lamps, as no darkness had settled upon them for hundreds of years. It seemed dreadful that the town should blaze forever in the same spot, dreadful at least to people going away to adventure upon the sea, and beholding it as a circumscribed mound, eternally burnt, eternally scarred. From the deck of the ship the great city appeared a crouched and cowardly figure, a sedentary miser." It's like that
Wow.
sense of leaving, something that may have been a little bit. It sounds like maybe a little bit oppressive from the minds of these people and these women in particular. Uh, Leaving it behind and going out into the darkness to something a lot less understood. And I don't know what's coming, but I'm
Hmm.
excited for it. So
Yeah, that's beautiful. I really like that. Is that a longer book or not too long?
it is a longer one. I think that's another reason. If it were just a short debut, I'd be like, oh,
Right.
I can deal with that. But I think it's 350, 400 pages,
Wow.
um, somewhere around there.
Nice.
But I'm now very encouraged, and no, I have the whole month, and it's only like 8 or 9 pages a day that they're taking it, and that just seems to fit into my otherwise very crowded reading schedule.
I was gonna say it's not like you have anything else going on in your reading life right now, so because you're still doing the journals too, right?
Yes, but that I take a break in those
Mm-hmm.
with the Virginia Woolf journals is what you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I take a break once I get to the kind of the publication date.
Oh, okay.
So I am up to the Voyage Out. Read the first, little like 2 months of her journal in 1915, and then the Voyage Out comes out. So I'm where I need to be, but I was holding back until Dorian just knew I needed a push. So
Right.
It's funny you mentioned it because just before the episode, I was just like scrolling through Spinster Lit titles and all that, and the Voyage Out was mentioned because apparently there's some aunts that are spinsters. I don't know if you came across them.
I've been wondering if that might be a relevant book, just based on what I read yesterday and the glimpse I got this morning. I was like, I wonder if this will develop into something where this would be a relevant book for that. So, but
Mm.
I'm not there yet to where I'd understand how they all play together.
That reminded me that in the what is that in Mrs. Dalloway, which is the only the other I read only two Wolf, but yeah, there is also a spinster in Mrs. Dalloway, the teacher who's German, I think, or
Mm.
I I it's
is
been
that Nobel?
a while since I read Mrs. Dalloway, and so I remember that now, though. I remember a German teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I think she's a spinster. Yeah.
well,
So maybe that's the thing in Wolf. Does she like talking about spinsters? She's not an author I know very well, to be honest.
she has and they tend to be people on the periphery,
Mm-hmm.
people in the family that come to these gatherings and have maybe their eccentricities, or at least things that others don't understand. She does often have a spinster, and this is a good transition. So,
Mm-hmm.
Nora, you are doing a Spinster Lit for September on Instagram, and you have a post a few weeks ago, or maybe it was even a month ago, uh, talking about it, but also why you love Spinster Lit. It can feel, I don't know, maybe this is just me, it can feel like a bit of a derogatory term. It
Mm.
doesn't have to be. But what does it mean to you? Like, what pulls you in? I thought you articulated some things so well in your Instagram post, but what about Spinster Lit is appealing? Maybe the wrong word, but draws you in.
Well, if I can, yeah, I was gonna say, about the derogatory term. I think maybe there's like a distinction we can make in sort of a historical meaning of spinster and maybe a more modern way of using spinster. I think um, this conversation we've been having online has been really interesting during that Spinster September event. People have come to me and we've sort of started talking about what a spinster is nowadays. And I think in English, the word is quite an interesting one because it comes from the role that women, if I didn't have children, they would like spin wool. And there's something quite proactive about it. It's like a tangible role. And I think in that, because that word has such I think a sort of positive early meaning, I think there's a way to rebrand that term today and be it something positive instead of that sort of frumpy dumpy spinster we can um, encounter like in older literature. But for me, the personal connection I have with Spinster Lit is something That sort of started in my late 20s. As I was gonna like turn 30, I got like quite anxious about turning 30, and I don't know if you do that, but I tend to sort of look at people who are older than me to get a sense of where things are going. And I felt like one of the messages of women in their 30s was that things would get better, and you'd get more confident and your priorities change, and you feel better in your body, in your mind, etc., etc. Fast forward a few years into my 30s, I didn't feel that way at all, and I kind of I kind of look more closely in those voices, in those women's messages, and I often noticed that those women were often in like early motherhood or in the honeymoon period of a relationship. Not that I'm saying that motherhood is a walk in the park, but for people who this experience is positive, I think they're quite vocal about it, and obviously it has a positive impact on their life. So it kind of made me think that I need to target a bit more what kind of older voices I need to look for, and look into women who decided to have a path of not having a child, because that's something that's always been clear to me, and I should have said that in the beginning, but I never was attracted to being a mother. So I kind of felt like motherhood back then felt like a choice that nobody could regret. So how could I feel that myself? What kind of choice can I make that I couldn't regret? And that put a lot of pressure on my shoulders, and I felt like, okay, no, I need to chill out and just see what people do generally. And if I can make an aside, I feel like the conversation around motherhood has changed quite a bit. It's getting a lot more nuanced and talked about. I'm not saying that people are saying that they regret having children, but they're having more conversation about maybe it's a lifestyle they didn't expect, or things are not the way they imagined, and it's harder than they thought. And I think because that conversation is getting more nuanced, I feel on my part, as somebody who decided not to be a mother, I feel like the conversation about a childless lifestyle is also getting more nuanced. So I'm wondering now, if I'd turned 30 today, if I'd been attracted to Spinster Lit as much as I would have, as had been, years ago.
Yeah.
And so I got to Spinster Lit. I can't really tell you what was the trigger, but I found out. I started looking around, and I felt like mainly the voices from spinsters were, or the description of spinsters in fiction, films, and all that were like to be caricatural women who live with cats and die alone, and it was quite sad. So I found like quite hard to find positive lifestyle, positive voices around their lifestyle, and I don't know, one thing leading to another. I found out about the interwar and how there were surplus women after the war not finding husband because they've been killed in the war, and having to have this huge lifestyle change where they have to join the workforce and finding a new way of living without a family. And when I found out about that, that period and that literature coming out of that period, I really felt like I'd find the source I was looking for. These were the voices I needed. And I think outside of their lifestyle choice, I feel like there's a bridge between the interwar and the times we're living now. Like for them, following the war and also living the rise of fascism and all that, it was quite a turbulent period of time. And for women, it was also very turbulent, and for on a personal level, because they were joining the workforce and they were trying to find ways to live differently as the people before them did. And now I can't say that I can't really think of something as major as joining the workforce. There's not like such a change now, but I think there are conversations following the Me Too movement and stuff like consent, sexual expression, sexual roles, gender expression, gender roles, that are quite affecting, I think. And I do feel like I said, there's like a bridge between interwar and now as a woman, where I feel like we're both on unstable grounds in a way.
Hmm.
Wow.
I love that, Nora, and thanks for all of the. There's a lot there that we could revisit and kind of give some thoughts to. I like that you're talking about recapturing the idea of a spinster,
Mm,
um, because yeah, it can be looked at as this is someone who was unfortunate.
right.
Their life didn't work out the way that
Hmm.
it was supposed to, because that naturally everybody has this goal as as a woman, potentially, and the stereotypical idea of them with cats, like you say, or that's their companionship. They were unlucky, maybe because of lack of fortune, maybe unlucky in their attractiveness, or maybe they're too meek, and they would jump at any chance. And the thing that I think is so interesting is all the books that I've been thinking about with this, how many of them are from women who are caught up in that trap of self-perception as well.
Mm,
I'm thinking, not one that I put on my list, but Anita Bruckner's book Providence. Several of her books have someone who is an older woman who feels this way about herself. I was unfortunate. I didn't get my chance. When will it come along? And they view themselves entirely negatively, even though they shouldn't be. But Providence in particular, the Providence is, will a man save me? Where's my savior? From this life that was not what I always thought I should live. It's not the life I had planned out when I was a kid reading stories, thinking of even Look at Me, her first novel,
mm,
reading stories about Cinderella going to the ball and finding her man, and this never materialized for me. What is wrong with me? But I love that there have also been several books that I've looked at that aren't, maybe they're still dealing with that idea, that pressure that society puts on us, to live up to certain expectations and roles, and the guilt and such that can come. But there are a lot of books that I think also just have women looking for other things. You put it in a, I thought the way you put it in your post, from August 15th was really good, that you love reading about women and the way they fill their time and find purpose outside of matrimony and motherhood.
mm,
And so I thought, I want to make sure that we that this is portrayed here, that this can be a deliberate choice. It can be something that is, in fact, often is something that's not negative, and that could be empowering and strengthening, and there's so much to explore with all of this. So
Yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, I went through a similar cycle where I was kind of trying to think of which books I'd want to cover today and thinking about the negative stereotypes that you both mentioned. And one thing that I came across is something that Nora alluded to, was kind of this retaking of the word spinster, and the interest that has arisen in recent years about kind of recapturing that term and redefining it. Because even on like Goodreads, for example, you'll find lists and lists of Spinster Lit, and some of them are romances, some of them are best books for happy spinsters, so there's like this idea of
mhm.
not only a renewed interest in the idea of what it is and kind of looking at the different wrinkles or aspects of what that term means, but also people kind of recapturing it and redefining it. Like, you can be happy and be a spinster, quote unquote, for example. And I don't know if either one of you came across, there's a piece by Camilla Nelson that had some really interesting perspectives. And she said one of the things that you touched on, Trevor, spinsters are rarely the protagonists in the English novel. So historically, they were always kind of these satellite characters who, it was like the kind of eccentric old aunt who plays like a minor role. You see that even in Jane Austen and some of the other ones. But she also goes through, and it's kind of a lighthearted look, but she talks about some of the different stereotypes: the spinster grotesque, which is like Miss Havisham, the prattler, the hysteric, the pseudo spinster, the new spinster. And so she kind of goes through this evolution of like, even within the stereotypes, there's some different nuances of, she doesn't say the crazy cat lady, but I'm sure that, that falls under one of those. But it's just interesting to see people kind of delving in and finding the nuances of historically what it's meant. But then the new spinster, she starts to kind of allude to how it's changing, and there's this redefinition going on. So yeah, I'm really glad that you picked this topic. It was really fascinating, Nora, just to kind of go down the
Yeah,
rabbit trail a little bit.
you two make me want to talk about the um, like the types of spinsters I've came across, and I kind of written along a list of like types I've seen. I mean, I've not read a lot, but in the books I've come across. But yeah, just before that, I just wanted to ask you, what's your like? Do you feel any connection to the subject? What's your like? How do you connect to Spinster Lit yourself? If I'm not putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I mean, I can jump in real quickly and just say, again, this is somewhat playing off of the older stereotype. So, again, this is an evolving topic, but I would say one of the things that has historically drawn me to it is Trevor and I have talked for years now about quiet lives, lonely lives, people who sometimes feel like they're on the outside looking in. So, for me, that's kind of an instant connection. Like, you know, just the fact that we can all relate no matter what point of life we're in, or what our relationship status is or whatever, we can all relate to that feeling of either loneliness or having time to, like you said, to fill and to take that time and choose to do what you want to with it. But also, again, historically, a lot of these women were on the outside or felt like they were on the outside looking in. And I think for anyone, but especially for readers, that's often something that you can connect with, of that feeling of maybe many of us were shy children who would be reading in the corner while everybody else was playing, or just things like that. So for me, that's one of the connections that I would bring up. And also just the fact, my love of classics, whether it's Jane Austen or the Brontes or, Thomas Hardy or all these people down through the years, I think there's a connection there as well, just because often there are those characters who could be defined as spinsters within some of these books that I've loved from, the very beginning of my reading time.
Yeah, and I think Paul, you said it very well, and I would. A lot of what you said resonated with me as to why I feel the attraction. But I think a part of mine too is a desire to recalibrate my own mentality. I grew up in a small community where these were the expectations, and the prejudices that can grow up in those types of areas with someone that you think, oh, they never have gone out on a date, or they're going to end up single. And in my community, it was very religious, where that was kind of the end goal, is to get married and start a family. And so in a desire to kind of take that apart a little bit and see it differently. And sometimes it's that moment of self-recognition, or maybe not self-recognition so much as a realization that I've never given some things thought that I should. For example, reading Barbara Pym's Excellent Women and realizing what she means by that title. I don't know if you're there yet, Nora. I don't want to spoil it for you, but
Literally after chapter one, so early beginning.
I don't think this will spoil it, but it's an interesting phrase, because that's the words being used to describe these women that everybody else thinks are always available to help, because they don't have these other obligations. They don't have a family. They don't have this, that, or the other. They're looking for things. So why don't we go and give them the things we want done? Why don't they prepare the banquet for the church social? Why don't they come and volunteer their time at this, that, or the other? And these are the excellent women. Our society could not function but for these excellent women. And I love being able to recognize some of those ideas that, even if they're not things that I've ever, I feel like, been explicitly thinking, or not been in those positions where I think I'm like the vicar who wants to use these women for the various purposes. But just realizing that, man, breaking out of it and starting to recognize the damage that this can do, and the lives that are underneath all of that, because that's so emptying of purpose. to think that if you don't have these normal social roles, we're going to give you others. Then we're going to be the ones who supply you with things to do, because you simply must need our assistance still. It's so I've loved being able to I think in a way break some of this down, and it has been over years, with like uh, Simon Thomas and Thomas on the readers,
Mm-hmm.
Hugglestock, Hugglestock would bring up quite often Spinster
Yeah.
Lit, and his love of kind of getting to know these women and their desires, their lives, their anxieties that are often brought on because of the way they feel they might be failing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think those kinds of things have been really uh, eye opening to me in a way that I hope has helped me be a, have a richer understanding of life and of people around me. But
Yeah, that's
good
good.
question.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
thanks for
That's good.
answering. Yeah. But yeah, if you want to go back to the types of spinsters, I don't know if that's something you've sort of formalized in your heads, but yeah, I feel for me there's like several types of spinsters I've came across in literature, and the one I'm always looking for is the independent spinster. I've only like
Mm-hmm.
two, and actually I'm going to talk about both of them today. But yeah, it's the spinster who is not so much wears her spinsterhood as a badge of but she's at peace with it. She wants to move forward and make something out of her life and find meaning and purpose. And I find that that type of spinster in literature is for me at least is hard to find, and I'm curious of the titles you'll pick. I'm
Mm-hmm.
kind of hoping there'll be that kind of spinster, but otherwise there's also the one we talked about, the sort of meek spinster, the frumpy dumpy, the mousy haired spinster, the one that just is being trampled over by everyone. And then you also have the queer spinster, the one who couldn't
Mm-hmm.
express their sexuality. So that label in and of itself as spinster is obviously wrong, but she was perceived by society as a spinster.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, you have the romantic spinster. I think Anita Bruckner does great romantic spinsters, the one who has a longing for a relationship. She's not happy with her spinsterhood. She wants to get out of that status ASAP. And so yeah, there's that type, or the one who's longing for a child, obviously.
Yeah, those are great. I think in our conversation about the books, a few of those might come up because, yeah, it was one of the things I was trying to do, like Trevor mentioned, we could go back to some of our defaults that we talk about all the time, and I would love to talk about them for, entire episodes, but it is fun to kind of try to look at some different angles. And I think a few of the ones you mentioned will come up somewhat in the books that I talk about today. So,
Yeah, me too. Should
yeah.
we get to the books? That'll help. I think we may as well, and that'll keep broadening
Yeah.
the thing a little bit. Paul, why don't you go ahead, and then I'll
Okay.
go, and then Nora, you can close us out.
Sure. So I'll kick off. This is a book that I talked about. I've probably talked about it numerous times because I love it so much, but I know that I talked about it on our episode about people who are aging or people who are getting older. And it's The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearn by Brian Moore. Um, this is a book I absolutely adore. It was one of the very first NYRB classics that I ever read. And it was also my first book ever by Brian Moore, who is an author that I have since read several more and really loved. And I look forward to reading, the rest of his catalog over time. But in many ways, this is a book of the three that I chose. This probably is the closest to falling on the negative stereotypes that we've talked about, the darker sides of the ideas of being a spinster. As you can gather from the title, she is not a happy person. There's a lot of loneliness in this book. And it takes place in Belfast in the 1950s and centers around the titular character who she's just moved into this kind of shabby boarding house. And she's just trying to get her bearings and looking around her new room and meeting the other lodgers there. And so as we get to know her, we get these glimpses over the course of the book into her history and realize that she has some things, some, alcoholism and other issues that she's dealing with in her life. So just as I was looking through the reviews and descriptions, I saw it described as, quote, a sensitive study of a middle-aged alcoholic woman in drab Belfast in her desperate last attempts at finding love and companionship. So again, that falls into kind of one of those maybe stereotypes, or at least the more traditional views of what a spinster means. And then Anne Leary of NPR said it's, quote, a short book about a lifetime of longing. So I'll just read a couple of quick sections to give people an idea of what's going on in this book. But he's really good at capturing the loneliness and the emptiness of her days. So there's a section that says, "There was no hurry. Friday, a dull day, a day with nothing at all to do. Although it would be interesting at breakfast to see what sort of food Mrs. Henry Rice gave and who the others were. She lay abed 20 minutes, then washed in cold water and went shivering to the mean heat of the stove. She slipped on her underthings, under the concealing envelope of her nightgown, a habit picked up at the Sacred Heart Convent in Armagh. And so, it gives like this idea of the hours, she's lonely. She wakes up, she can just lay there in bed because she doesn't have a whole lot going on. But then there are these other sections where she is, getting ready, and she's brushing her hair in front of the mirror, and she's looking at herself. And this is one of the times when Brian Moore does some really fascinating things with memories. As she's sitting there kind of methodically brushing her hair, she starts to drift back, and you get some backstory into ways that, she has kind of become who she is. So it said, she watched the glass, a plain woman, changing all to the delightful illusion of beauty. There was still time, for her ugliness was destined to bloom late, hidden first by the uniformed gawkiness of youth, budding to plainness in young womanhood, and now flowering to slow maturity in her early 40s. It still awaited the subtle garishness which only decay could bring to fruition, a garishness which, when arrived at, would preclude all efforts at the mirror game. And so it's a very sad book, again, like because she's dealing with alcoholism and loneliness, and she's sitting there thinking kind of what we were talking about, like, I've missed my chance. So again, this is one that I wouldn't say is one of the ones that Nora is seeking out for, the more positive spin. But at the same time, it does, to me, capture a chunk of humanity. It doesn't have to be a spinster. It's somebody who is in a rough spot in her life and is trying to make the best of it. So there's something admirable to me about it, even though there's a lot of sadness. So I'll just close out really quickly. We mentioned Jackie Wine a lot on here, but she summed up this book very nicely back on her blog in 2018. And she called it an outstanding novel, probably one of my top 3 for the year, but it's also a devastating read. The characterization is truly excellent, from the nuanced portrait of Judith, complete with all her flaws and complexities, to the immoralities of James Madden and Bernard Rice. It's also beautifully written, a heartbreaking paean to the loneliness of a life without love. So again, I thought I'd start off with one that was a little bit more of the classic negative view, but at the same time, it's just an achingly beautiful book. I love it. So that's my first one.
All right. And I've read that one, again, based solely on the cover from NYRB Classics.
Yeah, that's right.
But I purchased it. But
it's gorgeous.
The one that I'm going to bring up first is one that I don't know if, looking up reviews and such, no one ever calls this character a spinster. She's just referred to as a single woman. In her, I think she's in her 40s. But it's Jhumpa Lahiri's Whereabouts. Paul, did this one come to mind at all for you?
It didn't, but now that you say it, it should have. That's great. I'm so glad you brought it up.
And I think part of it's because she's not presented as someone pining, or she's lonely, but it's a deliberate isolation. And so again, I'm trying to think of that stereotype. What do we think of when we think of spinster, versus just a single woman who is a little, is deliberate in her life. And in fact, this is one where, as she's going through, it's a short book in short sections of this woman, we don't know her name, who is single, and deliberately so, and is figuring out her way around the city in Rome where she's always lived, and then trying to perfect her solitude. In fact, this is what she says: solitude, it's become my trade. As it requires a certain discipline, it's a condition I try to perfect. And so she thinks of her routines, and I really enjoyed this book. There's a power to it of her looking at where she's at, and again, I guess trying to perfect this condition that she has chosen, And again, I thought it was an interesting thing. I can't probably get much more specific to it, but every review just refers to her as a single woman, because spinster doesn't tend to leap to mind that term, even though it should apply, and especially if we're trying to kind of recalibrate what it means, or grab on, change the definition. This is a book about a spinster who is happily so, and has a deep interior life and other thoughts than what we might think a spinster should be thinking about. She's not trying to go and find her husband. She's not wishing that she had. She just is, and it's a great little book. So
It is a great book. Have you read that one, Nora? Because that one would be...
No, actually, I think it's you, Paul, who brought up that, or wrote that author's name on my radar, because you talked about her quite a few times on the podcast, and
Yes,
I think, yeah, in the context of her, is she like of immigrant descent, right?
She
Yeah,
is.
I feel
Her
like there's a
parents.
couple of things you said about some books you read that really resonated with me, and I've been like keeping an eye out, because I'm generally, when I buy books, I'm thrifting, so it's left up to chance, but it's not an author you find here at all, so I think I'm gonna have to actually buy it from a shop like a big girl.
Yeah. Well, if you do, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because as Trevor just said, I think that one could at least tick some of the boxes of what you described as.
Yeah, it sounds like exactly the kind of thing I'm looking for. I think those books where there's no label of spinsters are actually the most interesting one, because they're not defined by their spinsterhood. They're just humans trying to live, right?
Absolutely. Well, what's your first book, Nora?
Oh yeah, my turn. So my first book is Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner. I mean, I had to mention her. I know she's a bit of a cliche in the Spinster Lit, but for me, she is the absolute blueprint of what I'm looking for in a spinster character in literature. And I don't know if it's useful that I give a little summary. I feel like everybody's read Lolly Willows, right? I don't know.
Probably, but I don't think a summary would hurt.
I haven't yet, just so you know,
What?
but I'm looking forward to it.
No, you have to scrap all your caramel stuff and all that. You read Lolly Willows.
All right, I'll throw the other stuff away for the time being.
So yeah, just for you then, Trevor. So Lolly Willows, so it's a book that was written in 1926 by, as I said, Sylvia Townsend Warner, and it's about this woman who's lived all her life in Somerset, in the countryside in the UK. She lives with her father. She's been taking care of her father, and you get the sense that she has a deep connection with nature and plants and the use of plants and all that. But unfortunately, her dad dies when she's 28, and she's not married. She hasn't ever expressed a desire for marrying or anything, and as such, she became the charge of her brother, because a woman who's alone is not proper, right? So she has to move to London and live with her brother, who has, I think, a couple of girls, and she's involved in their upbringing. And for 20 years, she's gonna, take care of those girls and, be part of the family. And then 20 years pass, and she's now 47, and she realized that she has no use as a carer of these children anymore. They're grown up, and it's time for her to live her life, but she's not quite sure what it means. And you go along with her in these big walks around London, and she's thinking, and one day she has some sort of revelation while she's in a shop, and she realized that she wants to buy a cottage in the countryside and just live there and just have big nature walks, and that's her plan, and she makes her plan happen. And then I think I'm going to stop there, because I don't know, maybe I'll say, I don't want to spoil things for you, Trevor, but yeah, maybe I'll stop there. So it's an amazing book, because the writing first is beautiful. It's very evocative, and I like the fact that Lolly Willows is a person who has, a plan, and she's just going with her ideas no matter what her brother thinks. Her brother was quite against the idea of her living in the countryside on her own, and the fact that she reflected on her life and what she wanted and went for it, I find that really inspiring.
Yeah. I'm so glad you picked that one because I thought you might. And if you didn't, I was going to bring it up as an honorable mention because, like you said, there's always that fear of somebody who you think is just a given that somebody will mention, and then none of us do.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, no, we should have mentioned her. So I'm glad you did.
Yeah, for me, she had to be mentioned in the next one as well because they're so important for me and Spinster Lit as general. Yeah, I call them my alpha spinsters.
I love it. I have one like that too later on. So, well, do you want me to go on with my
Yeah,
next
what
one?
is your next one?
So this is probably my most controversial pick as far as the definition of spinster. So you guys may just vote me off the island here. It's The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbary. I don't know if either one of you have read this one, but it's going to push our definitions of the word spinster because the character that I'm thinking of is an older unmarried woman of a certain age, but she's actually a widow. So I don't know if you think this counts or not. I will kind
It's
of
a
make my, oh yeah,
it's
go
a
ahead.
discussion that we had on Instagram. Like, what is it? Is a divorced woman a spinster?
Mm-hmm.
Is a widow? Is a nun a spinster? I mean, we all seem to have different
Right.
way. For me, if I have to like go into the definition, I think I wouldn't count widow as a spinster because I think a spinster need to have borne the weight of loneliness and judgment from society.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I'll make my case as to why I think maybe
Oh,
she could be
sorry, it's been
considered.
ruled on. It's been ruled on,
Okay. All
Paul.
right. Well, I
No,
guess it's
no,
your turn then,
my
Trevor.
turn.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Go ahead.
Yeah. When we invited Nora on, I didn't know she would be like, kicking me out here, but she's the new co-host of no.
That was my
So
plan all along.
So this woman's name is Renee Michel, and she's the concierge of this luxury apartment building on the left bank of Paris, where she's been working for decades. And she's a really fascinating character because her husband did die some time ago. And so to me, the reason that I thought it might apply that she could be, a fit for this category is because she's had to redefine herself and she's taken on this role and she's viewed in a certain way by the lodgers there. And she has this rich interior life that is not reflected in the facade that she kind of has created for herself in this role. So, in order to kind of fit her role and to keep her job, she presents herself to the residents as kind of this lowbrow person who just, watches bad television all day, soap operas and game shows and things like that. So, whenever somebody walks by her little office, that's kind of the impression they get. She's eating junk food and watching junk TV, basically. But as we read along, we get a true glimpse of this rich intellectual life that she actually has. She spends her days reading literature and philosophy and listening to opera, and she actually really likes these high-end, foods and things like that. So here's a section that I'll touch on that gives you a quick idea of her voice. She says, "I've read so many books, and yet, like most autodidacts, I am never quite sure of what I've gained from them. There are days when I feel I have been able to grasp all there is to know in one single gaze, as if invisible branches suddenly spring out of nowhere, weaving together all the disparate strands of my reading. And then suddenly the meaning escapes, the essence evaporates, and no matter how often I reread the same lines, they seem to flee ever further with each subsequent reading. And I see myself as some mad old fool who thinks her stomach is full because she's been attentively reading the menu." So I just love that. Anyway, I think all of us as readers can probably relate to that. So it's very fascinating, like I said, the outward appearance she gives, but then we get these glimpses into some of her insecurities, but also just she is not this, lowbrow kind of lonely person that she seems to be. She does have that rich intellectual life that we've been talking about, and she has layers that a lot of people from the outside wouldn't even think were there. So I really liked that wrinkle of an older woman who seems very pedestrian but contains multitudes. And then the other fascinating thing about this book is the relationship between her and Paloma, who is a 12-year-old girl who lives in the building. And this little girl is very disillusioned with the world she lives in. She's grown up in a lot of privilege, and she calls it, quote, "the vacuousness of bourgeois existence." And so based on that, she plans to commit suicide on her 13th birthday. So she's in obviously a bad place. But the two of them, through this relationship that is not saccharine at all, it's very well done. They develop a relationship that I just think is fascinating. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Tove Jansson's The Summer Book, where there's kind of the older, maybe grandma or maternal figure and the really young figure, and this relationship that they have. So, again, I don't know. It sounds like I might have just, wasted my time for the last few minutes trying to make my case. But I do think whether this falls into the definition of a strict spinster or not, it does do a very nice job of detailing a woman of a certain age who is very fascinating to spend some time with.
It's
All
a book
right.
I never read, but yeah, it's been on my radar. Yeah, but I think it does go into the conversation of, a woman who has to find new ways to find meaning and connection with people
Mm-hmm.
outside of family ties, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes the best way to kind of explore a topic is to look at the edges, even if you may go over
That's what I
a
thought.
little bit.
Poke at the edges a little bit. Yep.
And my next one maybe does that a little bit too. Not the same way Paul's does. I mean, I think this is
Yeah.
in bounds, but just thinking about Jane Austen's novels.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Miss Bates and Emma. You've got who is a spinster and who is impoverished. I mean, there are some wealthy single women in Jane Austen, but many of them are not. And you've got Charlotte Lucas in Pride and Prejudice, who goes forward with what we can only assume must be a rather lonely and horrible marriage, because in many ways society was built to enforce the idea of what should happen, that a woman should marry, and if you don't, then you're going to be kind of discarded, and good luck. Hopefully you can get some charity from your wealthy neighbors. And I don't think that this has or had changed very much for a long time. um, I think it's a little different today, hopefully. But the book that I'm going to look at next is Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth, which is again a woman who, in Lily Bart, who is maybe more trying to avoid becoming a spinster, or is fearsome of the life of a spinster, even though that might be what she really wants. She's 29, 30 years old or so in this novel over a couple of years. Um, she's actually is a beautiful, desirable. There are a lot of the wealthy men of New York society who are courting her and want to, um, I can't remember exactly. I feel like there may have been uh, plenty of proposals, or at least, hey, this would work for you. She doesn't really want them, and she doesn't want to get married just to solidify her place in society. But her wealth is running out. Her parents died and kind of left her with nothing. She just happens to have enough stature in society to play this role so long, but it's about to run out. And I just really like how it's not as simple as it seems for her to avoid marriage because she doesn't really want it. Um, there's a place where well, this social structure of this is your natural next place to be a wife. Otherwise, you really don't have any options. It's locked in place by essentially killing anybody who would oppose it. There's a quote that says, "It was easy enough to despise the world, but decidedly difficult to find any other habitable region." There's, if this is the world that it is, you live in it. Lily can't simply go out and get a job. She hasn't been raised to do labor, for one thing, so she may lack some of the basic skills. But for another, even that wouldn't have been really livable. To go and become a laboring woman in the factories and such of New York at that time. She may have survived longer. She may have lived longer, but the labor itself would have slowly killed her as well. Um, and so, if she's going to be repudiated by society because she doesn't want to wed any of these eligible bachelors, then what's going to happen? She's basically going to be pushed down the rungs of the ladder all the way to the bottom. and this is a brutal society. It was not
Mm.
received well by a lot of Edith Wharton's readers when it was published, but how I think it's just a powerful book that shows someone who is wants to have that independence, but the society itself is not going to forgive her for that. And especially someone like her, where everything else seems to be going for her. She has opportunity. She has the 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 upbringing to fit in naturally with this, and yet she wants to repudiate it. Well, no, we're not going to allow that. It's a very mirthful book,
Right.
House of Mirth. Yeah. Um, but anyway, that one I think is a fascinating one. It was my wife who reminded me of that aspect of it, and I was excited to share some of my thoughts on it.
Yeah. No, that's great. I remember us having that conversation during our Jane Austen episode where the pressures that society was putting on women at that time in some ways removed some of the potential independence from sheer economic like realities of if you wanted to survive
Mm-hmm.
in that. And that also was empowering in some of the Jane Austen novels because the women would, still find strength and ways to make it work for themselves within these constrictions. But it definitely complicates this whole conversation.
Okay. Is it my turn? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Nora. Thank you.
Okay. So my next one is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark, and this is set in it was written in 1961 and is set in Edinburgh in the 30s, and we look at Jean Brodie, who is a teacher in a girls' school. And she is very much in the tradition of those mentor type teachers. Like I'm thinking like someone like Julian's Secret History or John Keating in The Dead Poets Society. Those kind of teachers who are like larger than life, and they sort of their influence go further than the walls of school. But the thing is, Jean Brodie is quite kind of a problematic character, let's say. And I don't think the book mentions what topic she teaches, but she uses her class as a sort of way to talk about her own ideas, her own politics, and talk about her own life. She's like very much oversharing with her like her pupils, and she has this sort of manipulative way of picking them as her favorites. She has what she calls her Brodie set, and she has this motto where she says, "Give me a girl of an impressionable age, and she's mine forever." So you have this really strong fusional relationship between Brodie and the kids. And the book follows her for 6 years, and things, as you can imagine, escalate because she has wrong ideas. Let's say that. And I picked her because, again, I think she really goes against that sort of trope or stereotype idea we have of spinster of somebody meek and mousy. She's like completely flamboyant. She knows what she wants and she will get it. And she's completely charismatic. You know that she's a wrong one, but you're still mesmerized by her.
Yeah, that is a great one. It's another
I
one I'm
love it
glad that you
too.
brought up. It's so good. And
I
like you
hope
said,
you were like
yeah,
I had the benefit of seeing the initials of Nora and Paul's authors, and so I was like, oh, I'm assuming Muriel Spark,
yeah,
maybe The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. I
I
did
did
write
the
it down just in case, but yeah,
yeah.
perfect. If you don't mind, because I have a hard
Mm-hmm.
out listeners, I am going to go first, and then I'm going to be surprised when I come to edit at Paul and Nora's final books. All right. Well, my last one that I picked, and I'm going a little bit out of order, as I said, but is maybe on the idea of the queer spinster, Nora. This is Tove Jansson's very short, lovely book, Fair Play. And while it's never explicitly said that the two women who are the kind of protagonists in Fair Play, they are older artist women, and they have been very comfortable. They don't live in the same house, but they live in the same kind of, uh, I don't know if it's a townhouse or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but they're connected. And the book is them spending time together. Sometimes, talking about their painting, sometimes arguing, sometimes watching a movie together. and it's such a beautiful description of friendship that I know some people go, oh, there may be more going on there, and I don't know. I don't think it's again an explicit part of the book, but one way or the other, these are two women who have found each other and have given each other comfort and friendship, while they have also pursued a life outside of matrimony and motherhood, and the life of artists, and they have that space to do it, and they found somebody who is accepting of that space to do it. I love Fair Play. Again, I really enjoyed Tove Jansson's other books. The Summer book is such a peaceful, comforting, yet somewhat threatening, under the undercurrents kind of book. Um, the True Deceiver is quite a different one, but this one, Jonna and Mary, the two women's, have just been happy for years to limit their society to each other on this little island on the southern side of Finland, and just looking back at my the end of my old thoughts on this, there is the potential for separation. They don't always get along, and they do. Maybe they're older. I think they're in their 60s, but they might still be looking for other things in life, and this might just be a time period for them. And so there's the potential for separation, but it's still, to me, a testament of stability and solidarity, that they can be the rock for each other as they're going through this and any other potential transitions in the future. And so I just thought that it's one of my favorite short little books, and I, again, I think it plays with the idea of the queer spinster, but definitely two spinster artists, which is another way. Um, a lot of artists in books, while they might not call them spinsters, tend to be single women who have chosen to live outside of society, maybe in a way that's a little more. Well, that's just what you get when an artist, with artists.
Right. I'm
So,
glad you brought that one up. I have not read that one yet. I've read The True Deceiver and the Summer book and loved both. So you talking about that makes me want to pick it up soon.
it's a
Sounds
short
really good.
one. You could get through it in a couple of hours, or probably an hour
Nice.
even.
Yeah,
Have you
that's
read
great.
any of those, Nora?
I
Tove
just read
Jansson?
the Moomins, obviously, and the Summer book as well. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think Kip McNeil is doing a Tove Jansson soon. I don't know which one, with the NYRB
It's
23
Yeah, her short
women.
stories.
Oh yeah, so yeah, I'm
So I'm
looking forward to
excited
that
for that.
one.
I am
Mm.
too.
All right. Well, with that, I will check in again. But Nora, thanks so much. It really has been nice to
Yeah,
sit with you, and I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say over the rest of the episode.
Now's where we can say whatever we want to about Trevor. All right. Well, my next book is another one that I've mentioned before, this author, quite a few times, and it actually ties in nicely with some of the themes that Trevor just mentioned, both artists and the queer spinster that you talked about. And it is Journal of a Solitude by May Sarton. Um, this is a book that will surprise absolutely no one because she's another author I bring up, seemingly every other episode or so. But she's one of those authors who just continues to come up, and she comes up often in these discussions about spinsterhood. She even has a novel called The Magnificent Spinster, which is one of my favorite book titles, I think, of all time. I love it. But also she brings in this is a journal, so it brings in this interesting aspect of her life as well. So Sarton herself never married, but she did meet a woman named Judy Matlick in 1945 who became her partner for 13 years. And so this is exploring that idea of spinsterhood because of where her life leads, and what you talked about at the very beginning, Nora, this idea that it wasn't always that they were spinsters in the true stereotypical view of things, but it might have been because of pressures of society at the time that they weren't able to express themselves or to be open about the relationships that they had. So it kind of thrust them into this role of being viewed that way. So I think, again, I've only read her journals, and every time I mention her on here, I keep talking about how I want to read the novels, and I've yet to do it. But one of the things that I love so much about her journals are the candid examinations of solitude, loneliness, but also creativity. That idea of a spinster who she doesn't shy away from the realities of sometimes you are lonely, sometimes you do feel an emptiness, but she also has a very rich, creative, artistic life. And so I love that idea of the fact that an aging woman, who could be defined as a spinster, can also be a font of art and intellect and all these complicated emotions, not just Mary from, It's a Wonderful Life, where she's like that dowdy librarian who's rushing off home. It's like, no, there's all these other aspects that can be included. And so, like I said, this book in particular, Journal of a Solitude, reflects her interior life over the course of 1 year. It's the 60th year of her life. And it's absolutely just packed with great passages. So I'll just read real quickly here. She says, "The value of solitude, one of its values, is of course that there's nothing to cushion against attacks from within, just as there's nothing to help balance at times of particular stress or depression. A few moments of desultory conversation may calm an inner storm, but the storm, painful as it is, might have had some truth in it. So sometimes one has simply to endure a period of depression for what it may hold of illumination if one can live through it, attentive to what it exposes or demands." So that part, it's grim and a little rough, and some of her stuff is that way. But what I love about her journals is, again, she doesn't flinch away from those feelings. But then here's another quick passage. It says, "It is raining. I look out on the maple where a few leaves have turned yellow and listen to Punch the parrot talking to himself, and to the rain ticking gently against the windows. I'm here alone for the first time in weeks, to take up my real life again at last. That is what is strange, that friends, even passionate love, are not my real life, unless there's time alone in which to explore and to discover what is happening or has happened. Without the interruptions, nourishing and maddening, this life would become arid. Yet I taste it fully only when I am alone." And passages like that just kill me. It's so good because she's acknowledging there is that need for, that's one of the things.
Reflection.
Like, yeah, she has connections. She has friends. People drop in all the time. She has pets. She has, and again, she did have this relationship. But I really like that she talks about when she does get some time alone, how valuable it is. And that's when her quote unquote real life actually begins. So, yeah, I thought that was a good example, both from.
It's weird how some people need that time to sort of recalibrate or absorb what happened, and then other people just go through life like, yeah, they just need the action, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I forget. Nor have you read any of either her journals or her novels yet?
No, again, like Jhumpa Lahiri, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her right. She's very difficult to find here in charity shops, but I did find her. I think it's a journal at 82 when I was in Belfast a few months ago. So that would be my next one and only one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well, she's one that I do think, like you said, she has at 70, at 82. There's one after the stroke. There's one, Plant Dreaming Deep. So her journals in particular, again, that's my experience, but they definitely explore her inner life and a lot of these topics that we're talking about today. So as you make your way through, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, she is. Well, great. Well, did you want to share your last pick?
Yeah, sure. So my last pick is a bit of a wild card. I don't think that it could really qualify as Spinster Lit, and I'm kind of worried that it's a bit blasphemous that I'm qualifying as is.
Well, after I did that with Elegance of the Hedgehog, I took the pressure off of you, so now we can just push it all the boundaries we want to.
It's just that it's an author that has so many scholars, so I'm feeling like I'm treading dangerous waters here. But yeah, my last pick is The Dead by James Joyce. I don't know if you read that one.
I have. I love it.
Yeah, it's my favorite. So I haven't read that much from him, but that's my favorite short story / novella of him. And this was written in 1914, and it happens during one evening on the 6th of January, which is the night of the Epiphany, which is an important word in that story. And in Ireland, actually, the Epiphany is not celebrated in the same way as it is in the rest of Europe on the 6th of January. You would celebrate what they call Women's Christmas, which is, I think, an important detail in the story, considering that it's involved 3 spinsters, maybe 4, but yeah, three spinsters for sure. And those three spinsters are Jane, is it married? No, Mary Jane, Kate, and I can't remember the last one. But yeah, there's two sisters and their niece. They're having a little party for Women's Christmas. It is a lovely festive setting during that novella. And we meet them as they're on the banister, and they're waiting for their nephew Gabriel, and he's late. It's 10 o'clock, and they're quite agitated because obviously they want to see him, but also he's the one who sort of can tame Freddie, who's one of their friends who's always drunk, and they don't want to deal with the awkwardness of the drunk guests. So that's very much the setting, and you spend the whole evening with them, and you have the festive meal and the cutting of the goose and the pudding and all that. And the reason why I bring that up is for two reasons. Even though those two sisters and this niece are not the main characters, I think Gabriel, their nephew, is the main character. Their spinsterhoods have an important role in the story, but also in the sort of historical creation of that novella. There, at the end of the story, I'm going to try not to spoil it, but Gabriel has his epiphany, and when he does, he starts thinking about his aunt and how, she's been singing that song during that meal, and how she's lonely and maybe she'll die soon. And I think the fact that she's a spinster and she's never found love, and that she'll die alone in her bed, sort of externalize a sort of thought he has that maybe he himself has passed, like aside a chance for love as well. So I think, their spinsterhood seemed quite important, that story. But also I feel like James Joyce is telling us, when you compare Gabriel in his hotel at the end of the story, and the hotel is so cold, and you compare that to that house where the sisters lived, which is so warm and festive and full of friends. I think James Joyce is telling us that there's a way to have a full life as a spinster. And the last reason why I think their spinsterhood, and maybe their spinsterhood is important, that's probably wishful thinking, is that, the reason of that, of the collection Dubliners, was kind of made in a conversation that Ireland was having at the time, where there was a desire to have like a unifying identity, a national identity around culture. And yes, culture was an important one to unify that spirit, and also values. And during that evening, there's loads of mentions of the Irish culture with poems and songs. But also Gabriel does a speech in honor of the hostesses, the sisters, and they say that they represent an old-fashioned Irish value, which is hospitality. They're the representation of that value that is so important for that country, and as a form of identity. So I think, I don't know, maybe it's silly, but I think James Joyce is telling us that maybe spinsters were important for the fabric of society in Ireland in a way that can unify the people, because they have this space where they could organize gatherings. These gatherings that they organized, there are so many kind of people with different religions and ideas and, cultural interests, but still they managed to have a great evening and talk together.
Oh, I love that. I hadn't thought about that, but I think you're exactly right. I remember, because I read that within the last year, I reread it. And I do remember what you just described this is something that people look forward to. This is a well-known yearly event where these sisters host, and it's something people look forward to. People come from all over the city. Like you said, it's a variety of voices and faces. And so I think what you just described is perfect. It's these two women who could have been shoved aside or pushed aside, but instead they've become a central part of the year, and they are connectors and playing a vital role in the society. So no, I don't think you're reaching at all. I love that. I hadn't thought about that aspect of the story, so I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I feel like the fact that you picked three spinsters and possibly more, I wonder if that, that teacher, Mary Ivers, she possibly is a spinster too. I think it might not be a coincidence. There's something about their stages. And I think it gives us a positive spin to their life. Like you said, they're like a connector, but also it's not all rainbow and glitters. I think there's a bit in the novella where one of the sisters is quite hurt by the fact that she's been rejected by the choir she's been given all her life to. So there's the aspect that it's a complicated life, but a life that can be rich and fulfilling, as opposed to Gabriel, who had everything. He had the kids, he had the wife, and still he's in that lonely, cold hotel looking at the snow falling.
No, I love that. That's a great pick. Well, this has been wonderful. I guess before we wrap up, are there any other, honorable mentions or, anything else that you wanted to mention? I can pull up a couple that I wanted to mention here in a second, but if you have anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think as we said at the beginning of the show, it's kind of weird that we didn't mention Anita Bruckner or Barbara Pym.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're like sort of pillars in that kind of literature, but it's not they are not authors I'm over familiar with. As I said, I just started my Barbara Pym journey, and I only read Hotel du Lac by Anita Bruckner, and and I wonder as well, isn't Jean Rhys someone that could have been mentioned as well?
Yeah, I agree. I think she would be another one. I've only read, I think one of hers, but yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think she would be a great one to bring up. And then I was also thinking about like We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I don't know if you've read that one, but I think
I did, but yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, I think that one could apply pretty well because the two sisters are kind of, viewed from the outside as these very eccentric, and in fact they are pretty eccentric, but I thought that one would be one that would at least be one we could mention.
Actually I didn't read that one. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No, I've heard about it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then another one that came up that I was thinking about, and it's been a while since I've read this one, so a few of these might be pushing the boundaries again, but the book Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata.
I think that's a great pick actually, because it's seen through a like modern lens.
Yeah. So I thought those, if readers if listeners are thinking about some other ones to explore, those two came to mind. And then the last one, Cassandra at the Wedding, I thought was another one that
I thought about that one, but she's quite young, isn't she?
She is quite young, and that's why I wasn't sure. It's more about the mentality, I guess, of like the fierce independence, but yet
also it could be like queer spinster because she's gay, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So those were just a few that came up, but well, it's been so wonderful talking to you. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to say in closing.
No, I mean, it's been such a wonderful time, like talking books with you and to meet you. And you were, when they say don't meet your heroes, I think they're wrong, because it was really lovely.
Oh, well, thank you. It's definitely mutual. And I wanted to just, again, emphasize how much I love your Instagram videos. Your Sunday book chats are just always such a nice way to start off the week. And if there's anybody out there listening who's not familiar with Nora and her wonderful posts, I would encourage you. We will include all of her information in the show notes. I would absolutely encourage you to look it up and get to know her, because she is a great reader. And as you can tell from the past hour, she has a lot of wonderful things to say. So we will wrap up for now, but we will see everybody next time. And thank you again, Nora. So great to chat with you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mooks and the Gripes podcast. You can follow the Mooks and the Gripes and get show notes and book and film reviews at mooksandgripes.com. On Twitter, you can find Trevor at Mooks and Paul at BiblioPaul. You can also get information about future shows on our Patreon. If you'd like to donate to the show, anything and everything, even $1 a month, helps and is deeply appreciated. You can become a patron at patreon.com/mooks. Until next time.